So who wants to ask the first question of Dan? Yep.
Mr. Brown, can you...
Mr. Barker. Not Dan Brown.
Can you further expand your rationale that the opinion of a layman should have equal validity with a seasoned historian? A seasoned historian's opinion.
When historians and scholars write, not for each other but for the public, they expect that their views are accessible to all of us. If we all have to be experts in ancient Greek and if we all have to become scholars in order to find credibility to the Christian message, then we have to empty most churches. Most people are not coming to church because of the scholarship. They're coming for other reasons. So I respect the scholarship. I admit Jesus may have existed, but I think that, as I said before, if you look at, not just count up the numbers of scholars, but look at the evidence. Look at what Robert Price is actually saying. He's a minority, all right? But he's a respected historian. Look at what he's saying. Look at his evidences. Look at why he's saying what he is saying. Even when we lost our Supreme Court lawsuit by a vote of 5-4, there were 4 dissenters who gave very good reasons why the majority was wrong. So let's look at those evidences and those reasons and continue to learn as we go. By no means should any of us simply take a fact by authority. We should scratch beneath the surface and look at it. If you look at Islamic scholarship, Islamic theology, you will find an amazing consensus among Islamic historians about the truth and the reliability of the Quran. You will find that. If you poll all of them, there will be some dissenters, but you will find an amazing, wow, look at how all these scholars agree with each other within that tradition. Some of them are even not such believers, and yet they come to a similar conclusion. We have reason to doubt some of the motives of some of those Islamic historians, and maybe some of the noted professional authorities within Christian scholarship also have other reasons for why they are defending the faith of a man who walked on water and believed in talking snakes. You know what I mean? A Bible that is so clearly preposterous that nobody in the 21st century should believe all of it. So let's not determine truth by vote. Let's study for ourselves.
Thank you, Dan. A question for Chris. First hand up.
Chris, now a lot of what you've said I agree with, and I think most of it Dan would agree with, but nothing you've said has really proved anything other than a Jesus existed who believed things about himself. You haven't said anything about the walking on water, the talking snakes, any of that stuff. So what would you say to those kind of claims of the Bible?
I'd say that it's not something you can deal with as a generalization. The talking snakes in Genesis, which is at the other end of the Bible, though I admit it's in the Bible, I suspect that you're dealing with a mixture of things. The talking snake, I think, is pretty clearly metaphor, and I think it was intended as metaphor from the beginning. It is a piece of structured creation narrative literature. But your serious question, or rather the meat of your question, is how do we get from the relatively limited historical claims that I've just made this evening to the rather larger claims that make me not just an historian but a Christian historian? I take it that is the heart of your question. Yes. The answer is by lots of small steps. What you've got to do is start with what what the great majority of historians would agree with. And I'm, by the way, not simply arguing from authority. I'm saying these are the people who have put in the time and the effort. And they give their reasons. Don't just take their conclusions. I just couldn't fit in their methods in 7 minutes. But look at their reasons, look at their arguments. I absolutely agree with Dan. We do not just take these people as authorities. We look at the arguments they give. And we then take it step by step to not just what did Jesus claim about himself, but how credible are those claims historically. Now, I'm about to say something that many of you will find bizarre, but I say it and I stand by it. I find the historical evidence for the physical resurrection of Jesus quite compelling. I do not find a better explanation of the story in the New Testament than the explanation that the New Testament itself gives. If I am wrong, and the resurrection did not occur, then Christianity is wrong, and that's the end of that. But I think historically that the evidence is very strong for the physical resurrection of Jesus. I'm not the only one, I don't think I'm in a majority there, but I'm willing to make a case. Maybe that's for another debate at another time.
Thank you for your answer, Chris. And I'll ask a question for you or Dan.
Awesome. So, Dan, you were kind of saying that historians and agenda kind of indicates that what they write about doesn't actually happen. So, doesn't it then kind of follow through that history is semi-useless, and we have to question the existence of people such as Alexander the Great and Augustus, who we only have hearsay of, or maybe something claimed to be written by them? But how would you answer that?
First, I admire your honesty here in admitting that you hold a position which is somewhat in a minority in your field, and yet you still hold to it for reasons that go against the grain of the majority of scholarship. So I admire that. I think that's a good thing. And you have your reasons, right? As I said earlier, all historical claims are probabilistic. None of them go up to 100 or down to 0 as far as the percent goes. So the existence of Alexander the Great is very high. It's not 100%, but it's very, very, very high. Homer is a more shadowy figure. I read that scholars have a huge debate about whether Homer actually existed as a person or whether that was just a name added to some early poetry, early 8th century BC poems that were beautiful, that were later then doctored and expanded. You know what I mean? So we can't say with 100% certainty that Homer even existed, although if you think it's 50% or higher, then you might want to round it off and say, yeah, there was a guy named Homer. I mean, all of these historical questions are a matter of probabilities. And my point is that the probability for the historical existence of Jesus is not 0. It's not 0, but it's something less than 50%. That is my claim. And being honest about that, and I think some of you Christians in the audience, if you're going to take Chris's words at face value, I will have to admit that your 100% might have to come down to like 90 or something. I mean, you agree that you see that scholars disagree with each other about some of the claims. If the talking snake was a metaphor, then walking on water could have been a metaphor. Maybe God himself is a metaphor. Maybe the whole thing is one big metaphor that the early Christians were writing stories about. So if we allow for metaphor, if we allow for that kind of ambiguity, then you can see why many of us treat God himself with the same kind of skepticism that you treat what claims to be an actual historical event in the book of Genesis, but which you are convinced is actually not historically true.
Thank you, Dan. And a question for Chris, I think the young lady.
I'm prepared to be laughed at for asking this question because it may be something that a lot of other people in the audience know. But on the topic of a virgin birth, Mary was obviously considered to be a virgin when she was impregnated with Jesus, but if she was married to Joseph, is there any evidence to suggest why that marriage would not have been consummated? And would they have even been considered married even if they hadn't?
The answer is that as far as the New Testament describes the situation, Mary and Joseph were engaged but not yet married. I don't know very much about Jewish engagement and married customs, but I'm presuming there's enough commonality for that to make sense. So Mary was engaged to Joseph but not yet married, therefore they hadn't yet slept together. She was at that point a virgin. Catholic doctrine claims she remained a virgin. I'm about to say something naughty, which probably explains why Joseph disappears from the story as time goes by. I'm sorry, that was naughty. We don't know why Joseph disappears from the story.
They were not married ever?
Oh yes, they were married, but we don't know at what point during the pregnancy or after the birth. I don't think the New Testament even hints at when it was.
Thank you, Chris. And the next question for Dan, I'll take
Dan, you say the death of Jesus is a higher probability than the resurrection. If the resurrection didn't happen and the ladies went, like most of the books say about Jesus' resurrection, the ladies went to the tomb the morning and found there was no body, there was an angel instead, what happened to the body?